Welcome to Sherlock Mondays. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and we're going on a biblioventure through the stories of Sherlock Holmes. This is episode 29, The Adventure of the Empty House, our penultimate episode and the last episode of a story that we're doing. We'll do a wrap-up in the next episode. And joining me as co-host is Monica Schmidt. Hi, Monica.
Hey Ed, how you doing tonight?
Good. And we also, Monica, have a special guest to welcome, Steve Rothman. Hi, Steve.
Hi there, Ed. Hi, Monica. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, it's a great pleasure to have you on the show, Steve. To talk about, and we have two left tonight and the next. We have two more shows of Sherlock Mondays to deduce, decipher, dissect Arthur Conan Doyle's stories about the world's first consulting detective, Sherlock Holmes, and his able assistant, Dr. John Watson, in a kind of conversational annotation. I remind everybody, if you're watching live right now, I ask you to please like these videos, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so, and have fun in the live chat. It's one of the great things you get to do when you watch live. If you're watching the recording, also please like and subscribe and read the live chat. It is always lively. Sherlock Mondays is also an audio podcast. Thank you to all of our podcast listeners. And I'd especially be grateful if you would consider making a donation to the Rosenbach. If you've already donated or joined as a member, thank you so much. That's how we get to do this show for free, because of your support for the Rosenbach. So if you've not already donated or become a member, I invite you to do so. And I'll say a little bit more about that at the mid-break, when I will also reveal the subject of our next biblioventure series, which will begin in the fall. Feel free to guess away in the live chat there. We're going to be, revealing it at the mid-break. I'm going to keep you waiting longer. So I say I'll read. Maybe I'll wait till the end. No, that will really leave you hanging.
You're so mean, Ed. If you wait till the end. Oh my God.
This isn't going to be a short show, people. I can't, like last week with Final Problem, I couldn't give short shrift to that. We can't see the empty house, definitely. And before that, before we even start talking about the story in our annotation with Monica and I've got Steve on. I am thrilled to be able to talk to Steve. And also, Steve will be sharing images of Conan Doyle's manuscript for the story, one of the great treasures of the Rosenbach's collections. Everyone on this show has paged through that manuscript and seen it in person. We have our very special guest is a friend of the Rosenbach, as well as a great Sherlockian. Steve Rothman was the editor of the Baker Street Journal for over 20 years. I don't know the exact number, Steve.
23.
23 years. There you go. He is also the foremost expert on Christopher Morley, founder of the Baker Street Irregulars. And he edited, you have your edited the Standard Doyle Company, which is a collection of writings that Morley did. Is it all? It's all the writings Morley did on Holmes, correct?
Pretty much. I think I found one or two little things since then in the ensuing 30-some years. But
more importantly for this show tonight, at least only for this show, it's more important. Steve is one of the editors, along with Robert Katz and Andrew Solberg, of Out of the Abyss, a facsimile of the original manuscript of The Empty House, edited by the three of them with annotations, commentary, and a series of essays in it by such illustrious Sherlockians as Ray Betzner, Nicholas Utekin. Lindsay Fay has a little fictional piece in there, which is absolutely wonderful. Steve, you write about Dr. Rosenbach, which I love reading, because you are also you've been a member of the Rosenbach for a long time, haven't you, Steve?
For a long time. I think it's 50 years.
As long as you've been a Sherlockian, almost, maybe.
Not quite, but a long time. So it's been fun.
And so everyone knows, this is full disclosure, when I first decided to do Sherlock Holmes for this biblioventure, my first call was to Steve Rothman to talk about potential co-hosts and guests and the structure of the show. And Steve, I really appreciate your advice and guidance. It has worked out well, and thank you for making connections for me, giving me ideas, supporting this show from the very start. It's
It's nice to know who's responsible for this. So thank you, Steve.
now we know who to blame. There you go.
He had it all planned out. He had your name, most
Oh.
of the names of his co-hosts. He already had
Take all the
in
blame.
his
I'll
head.
take all the
So,
blame. You can get the,
but it sounded exciting from the very moment. And in this household, this is what we do on Monday nights. And the few Mondays where we haven't been here, then that's what we do sometime on Tuesday. So
well, that's nice. And it's great to have people on the show who also watch it, which is nice. You're also a member of the Baker Street Irregulars, Steve. But I
am
remember you.
with the investiture of the Valley of Fear.
Yes.
Wow, that's significant. Woo!
Which I think was given to me because I am a Pennsylvanian. But
or
I
people
don't
are terrified of you. There you go.
I hope so.
Higher fear in them.
People are so afraid of me. I've had 3-year-old little girls giving me the look. So no one is afraid of me.
Yeah. Yeah, the little kids, especially if you're a stranger, the beard and a hat will scare the hell out of them. But once you go full Santa, you can usually get away with it. The kids are okay with that. So, well, Steve, I don't know if I've ever asked you. Did you come to Morley through Sherlock, or was it was the other way around? Wasn't it?
It's even stranger. It's I came to both of them pretty much at the same time, around when I was 12, more or less. I'd read a lot of the Sherlock Holmes stories as a little kid, and my father gave me a children's version of Sherlock Holmes when I was 6. I'd read most of the stories by the time I was 10 or so, but I read them. But when I was 12, there was a remainder house. There used to be a remainder house that was called Marlborough, that would every Sunday on the back of the New York Times' section, the editorial section, which had a different name than Opinions at that time, would take out a full-page ad and list in tiny, tiny print the names of all sorts of titles. And most of the books were $1. A couple were a little bit more, but most of them were $1. So I would go through every Sunday, and now and then I would talk my father into actually ordering a few books for me. And so one of those times when I was able successfully to talk him into getting a book, it was Sherlock Holmes of Baker Street by William Baring-Gould. And it came. I still have that copy, although I have others since. And I read it. I thought this was a wonderful book. I thought this was the funniest book I'd ever read because it was a biography of a fictional character. I thought, this is loony. This is wonderful. This is great. I didn't really notice that Christopher Morley was in the back in the bibliography stuff because I probably didn't pay much attention to it then. But around the very same time, I had gone to my school library because we had to pick out something for a book report and read Parnassus on Wheels. I loved it. I went back the next day and read The Haunted Bookshop, another manuscript held by the Rosenbach, and read that.
Christopher Morley's first 2 novels.
Right. Wow. I went back the next day and read and took out Travels in Philadelphia. This exhausted what Morley was in my school library. And I love that because I knew a lot of the places that he was writing about. So after this, I went to my local library and I took out what books they had. And then I exhausted them. I mean, maybe I'd read 10, but there were lots of other books that were listed in the books. So I started haunting the used bookshops, which I already knew about and liked to go to, and bought books now, noticing that most of them were first editions, and was able to buy a copy of the bibliography, or my father bought it for me because I think that was $5. And there we are, and no looking back. And so when I found out that they both intersected and that Christopher Morley had started the Baker Street Irregulars, I was the happiest little boy in the planet. So and that's how it's been ever
And then you
since.
joined the Rosenbach.
I did. I didn't and by the time I joined the Risbeck, I did know Rosie's connection to Morley because I'd read Ed Wolf's biography of the Doctor. So
The so tell us, well, tell us a little bit about this series. Now, not all these books are in print. This is out of print now, and people can
Mhm.
have to find
many
it.
of them are out of print. I'm sorry. This
But
is what is called the Manuscript series. And we've been doing this since about 2001 or two. The first one was a chapter of The Hound of the Baskervilles, the only extant chapter that we know of. And it's gone since then. We've been very successful in getting permissions from owners, both institutional and private owners, to have permission to reproduce these manuscripts. Our reproductions have gotten better and better. I would say, although it's not in color in this was probably the best single job that was done, because when the Rosie said, "Sure, you can do this to me, but we'll have to charge you $10 zillion because we have to go off to someplace special because of the way the book is bound," which Ed will tell you about more. And I said, well, what if I can figure something out? So I went to the people at the University of Pennsylvania, and this is a great story because this is how Philadelphia libraries work. They all cooperate. I went to them at the University of Pennsylvania, which has a whole department scanning manuscripts, basically medieval manuscripts, but manuscripts. And I said, "Hi, guys, would you like to do this for me?" They said, "Sherlock Holmes, cool beans." And I went back to Derek Dreyer, who was the director of the Rosie at the time. And Derek said, "That works for me." I said, "I can take it if you want, or you can take it. I don't care, however you want." He said, "No, I better take it for insurance sake." I said, "Cool." He did. They did a wonderful, wonderful job. It's a very detailed CD where you can see every single flaw. It's in color, even though it's not reproduced in color. And so that was it. And we had this wonderful cooperation. They charged nothing to the BSI. They charged nothing to the Rosenbach, but the Rosenbach now has it on CD as well. And so they can show a DVD of this to people if they need to, and not have to handle the books.
And there's three editors. It's yourself, Bob Katz, and Andrew Solberg. He's the only one I think I don't know. But how did the three of you then get this project, and how did you go about doing it and choosing essays to accompany this and all that?
Well, Bob and Andy had been working together on several books previous to this, and they'd had enormous fun. And in fact, they had edited the one on the second stain, which the manuscript is owned by
Irregular stain.
What?
Irregular stain.
Right, a regular stain, which is owned by Haverford College. Bob being a alum of said college. So was Christopher Morley. And then they wanted to do another one. So they said, "Steve, you live down the street from the Rosenbach." I do. I can practically see the place from my window. And I said, "Okay, I'll do this." But I was editing the Baker Street Journal. So I said, "You guys are going to have to do a lot of the work. I'll help you get authors, and I'll write for it, and I will do a lot of the heavy lifting for actual editing, but I can't do a lot of the other stuff." So I wrote, as Ed said, the chapter on the Doctor and his connections with Christopher Morley and Sherlock Holmes and that whole story. I also introduced something new. I asked Maria Fleischak to do a literature review. This is the first time we've done one of these, which has since become a standard thing in these books. And she did a lovely job. And other parts of the book,
For those who don't know, the literature review at the end is a kind of overview of all of the pieces written about and including in books about the empty house, both kind of academic and also people playing the game. And it's a
Yep.
really great compendium at the end there. Yeah.
She did a wonderful job, read a ton and a half of stuff.
Yeah.
And so that was all fun. We got a lot of good people. We worked together on things. We worked together on the introduction, which we kind of each wrote a bit of and then went back to and fought, but that's why it's so short, because nobody wanted to overstep the others and do that. And it was fun. There was endless amounts of emails back and forth, and when it was done, we were proud of ourselves.
Let's take a look at the manuscript. Should we do that? Because it's fun.
Yes, we should.
Let me share this here. It is bound. Here is the cover of it. It is bound in vellum boards, which I'll explain in a moment. Doyle used 3 composition books to write this story out, and they're not all filled. I'll go back here in a minute, but I want to show the cover of the first. And they're Paragon exercise books. I love that this is what he used. With the lined pages, and I'll share some of those pages in a moment. But to get back to the front here, he also he composed this story, and the pages are, well, I'll just share a quick page here because they're so cleanly written. And this is how at least he composed Sherlock Holmes stories, right? I mean, that I haven't seen manuscripts of other works, whether they're messier or not, but I don't know if you know, Steve, or Monica, but for Sherlock Holmes stories, he sits down and he's very clear in what he wants to say and writes it all out. Then he would go back once or twice, and we'll see some corrections that he made to do read-throughs and make some minor corrections, but this is the way he'd write his Sherlock Holmes manuscripts.
We know, Ed, that at least some of the times that he made notes ahead of time. There are several pages of notes that are extant for the Valley of Fear, where he outlines characters and things like this. And in other places, you can see that he's going ahead, and sometimes he can't remember a character's name, even in this one, and he leaves it blank, and there's this large space.
Yeah.
So he'll go back, but he must have written them out in a dead heat. But these are not fair copies. That is to say, something that he recopied to send to the printer. This is just how he wrote it.
Which is what it seems like. It seems like a fair copy, and it's not.
Yeah.
Because what the fair copy would have been is then he sent these in just the notebooks, not bound as it is now. He gave the notebooks to a typist to type up, and then he made 3 copies that we know of, we know that because on the cover of this, you can see real faint up here, 3 copies by Thursday. Morley Hotel, which was a hotel in England. And apparently this is from the typist. And this is what he was supposed to bring 3 copies to, probably Doyle.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. And then so then the copies were sent. Doyle hung on to these manuscripts. Now, unlike earlier manuscripts, Doyle did not, which he didn't seem to hang on to. From the Empty House on, a lot of the manuscripts exist that he seemed to want to. And then we also know that 10 years later after this, in 1913, he has them bound in vellum. And then the quote was from Doyle, "So as to be ready for the capricious millionaire whom we all hope for and never see." So he thought, well, maybe some collector with a lot of money is going to want to, have these, and I could sell them to him. But for this copy, for this particular story, he did not, because in 1916, during the Great War, Christie's had an auction to support war funds for the British Red Cross Society and the Order of the Hospital of St. John of Jerusalem. And Doyle donated this manuscript to them to be sold in the auction. And that's most likely when he inscribed it up here in the top corner, Sherlock Holmes, original manuscript, A. Conan Doyle. So, and if anybody is wondering, well, like, oh, Ed knows all this stuff because he's at the Rosenbach. I know all this because it's in Out of the Abyss. I know all this because in the facsimile edition, there's a great chapter by, is it Randall Stock?
Randall Stock.
About
about right.
history of this manuscript. And that's one of the great, things about this edition is that you have all of this information. All right, very quickly, before we look at some pages, it sold for £11 in the auction.
Whoa.
Not quite the millionaire fund. And then at one point it was bought for, we think, £2, 10 shillings in 1921. Maggs Brothers, the big antiquarian book dealer in England, got a hold of it. They sold it for £38 to W.K. Bixby, who has put his name right here. He was a huge book collector in the late 19th and early 20th century, donated a lot of his books to the Huntington. And then Dr. R was a big customer of his. And I think Dr. R may have even acquired books for Bixby as well. And we don't know how much Dr. Rosenbach bought it for from Bixby. And you guys have an Out of the Abyss information from our librarian, Elizabeth Fuller, who whenever I need to know anything about anything in our collection, I ask Elizabeth. She is a brilliant, brilliant librarian and caretaker of our collection. She looked in the vouchers in our records for the Rosenbach Company and couldn't find a separate voucher for this particular manuscript. But the Rosenbach did it. Dr. R did at one point in 1929 pay Bixby $55,000 for an entire lot of books and manuscripts. Perhaps this was in there. And so that's the provenance, that's the history of this manuscript and how it got in the Rosenbach's collection. It was prized by Dr. Rosenbach and kept in his personal collection. It didn't go into company stock. It wasn't for sale in catalogs. It was in his personal collection in his own library. And let's take a look at some of the pages of it. Doyle added this to the front, perhaps when it was bound, it could have been, because it's outside of the other, the exercise books. Sherlock Holmes series, A. Conan Doyle, Empty House, original manuscript. But this is the first page, which we've already seen. And again, how neat, and it's written on one side of each page, make it easier to be, read by a typist afterwards. You can see he's added a little bit here. When we get to this page, we can see a correction that he's made in that it was originally the Honorable Robert Adair, but he's also left a blank. So he has written the Honorable Robert blank Adair, knowing that he's going to maybe add something to the name, and then he just changes Robert to Ronald. Am I reading this correctly, Steve?
I would think so, although in the Strand and not in the Strand, but in the first English book edition, it's Robert Adair.
Oh, it is interesting.
Ronald, yeah. Which
we don't know what.
Says something
well,
about
as far as we know, the typescripts don't exist.
There's like one typescript for one story, and just like there's one galleys for one story, but they don't exist.
You could see where's a page? This page has got some corrections on it here that, he's gone back. His head had been horribly mutilated by a revolver bullet, and then he's put expanding revolver bullet in here instead of an expanding character. But no weapon of any sort was found in the room. Adding little details, the money arranged in little piles of varying amounts. This is on a read through 2 or 3 times that he's done. for this. I don't want to go. There's a couple other things that we'll look at later when we're talking about the story. I mean, Mrs. Turner, Mrs. Hudson. We'll show that later when we do that part.
Yep.
But Steve, it's, I mean, kind of a general question, but what do we? I mean, as someone who has edited the manuscript, what can a manuscript reveal about the text?
Well, just as you said, it does reveal the author's working style. It shows that he did go back and look at it. It also shows that he really did write llama with 2 L's, and it wasn't a printer's mistake or something like that, nor was it corrected by any printer, which is the most curious thing, because they had real copy editors and proofreaders in the magazines in those days. They were all defrocked priests. But we learned that. We learned that how he thought about things, that went through, he wrote this out very quickly, but very neatly, but he clearly was thinking about the characters. Some of them changed. Moran's name changed from Aloysius to Sebastian.
We'll see that later. Here's the one that you mentioned earlier. This is the bookseller. As I did, so I struck against a small deformed man. And then he wrote the N in here, elderly deformed man, not small.
And he does it again, I think, in another page or so. And then I think it occurred to him that Holmes, who he always describes as quite tall, how was he going to make himself small? But when Holmes reveals himself to Watson, he sort of stands up and stretches and says, it's difficult to lose a foot in height. I would say it sure is. So I think he forgot that section of the corrections, because Doyle read through things and made some changes, but he never really read through very carefully when he was making his changes. At least that's my impression.
All right.
But, this is such a great manuscript. I'm jealous that you're going to be able to talk about it, because we learn more about Holmes, facts about Holmes here, than we do in any other story. Really.
That's my next question. What do you give me your take on the empty house before you go?
My take on the empty house is that it is fun. First of all, we see that Watson is not a successful detective. He is not Dr. Watson, the crime doctor. That was for Monica.
Oh no, no, I appreciate that. I'm thinking without a clue.
And we see that Holmes, we learn about Holmes and his travels. We learn about Holmes' relationship to Mycroft more here than anywhere else, really. This a little bit in Final Problem, but Final Problem, difficult story, But this is an exciting story, because this is Holmes, healthy, strong Holmes. Nobody has ever said this is delusional Holmes. And we have Holmes who knows his London really, really well, that he can take these alleys to the back of the empty house. And there's all this exciting stuff. There's Moriarty, who doesn't like to have Moriarty. I mean, he's only in backstory, but he's there. And there's the wonderful Moran.
Yeah.
Who is just, such a wonderful, horrible man that, just killing someone just for cheating at cards. Am I allowed to say that? Have I spoiled the story?
Oh yeah, we don't do spoiler. We've all read the story. That's
okay.
If you haven't read the story, stop watching. Go read the story. Come back.
Come back.
So I think it was great, and was a wonderful way to restart the series, which had been, well, there'd been The Hound of the Baskervilles, but basically the story had been on back burner. The series wasn't happening for years.
Yeah, 10 years. I mean,
clearly,
Hound in between, but that was just year before.
Just that, and that was a standalone, and this is just great. You could see that Doyle really appreciated getting paid the enormous amount he was paid for this series.
He did.
Um, here's
Yeah,
something really
who
good to
who
start with.
wouldn't
I'll
want
give
to
you
get
some
paid a
crap
king's
later on,
ransom?
but this is good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All righty. Well,
All right.
Steve, it's a real pleasure. I really appreciate you taking time to come hang
Thank
out.
you very much, Ed. This was lovely. It was a joy. Have a wonderful rest of the show. Good to see you, Monica.
Good to see you,
And
Steve. Be
we'll see
well.
you guys around. Take
Thanks for
care.
watching, Steve. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Well,
Oh,
always go. And we'll share.
I love Steve.
I do too. We have a couple more pages to share later that we'll do. We'll hit those moments in the story when they occur, because it'll be nice to hit them, when Watson faints. We'll show the page. We'll show the very end. We'll do that, couple of little moments. So, because we've got a lot to do tonight.
We have
Now,
a lot to cover.
we can't cut it that short, but we'll try not to keep you up all night. All righty. We have to give this story its due. And before we start, what are we drinking?
Oh, we are drinking fabulousness. My husband couldn't be here today, so he was a gentleman and actually sent me with a care package where he batched today's cocktail.
It's lovely.
I have the best ginger. I really do.
This is
But
the
oh, go ahead.
Watson Reviver. Every episode has featured a Sherlock-tail designed by our good friend and co-host Mary Alcaro. The recipes are in the YouTube description for each episode. I have sent them out via email, because there's not one for next week. You'll have to get the email to see what we're drinking next week. You're drinking whatever you want to drink is what you're drinking. The Watson Reviver, it's basically an adapted corpse reviver cocktail. This is cognac, applejack, or Calvados, and sweet vermouth. It's just delicious. It is strong enough to revive not only a corpse but a shocked Watson. Cheers.
No, I'm almost thinking it should have been brandy.
Yes. So, well, I use brandy in mine. So, but out of brandy, that's
yes, brandy is the official beverage of the state of Wisconsin. So yeah, there's a thing about that, but we don't have time for that. We have too much to cover.
So somebody in the comments about Doyle's handwriting says, most handwriting was beautiful and neat back then, right? No way. Try to read Dickens' manuscripts. Let me tell you, or letters that he's writing to people that they need to read them. So yeah, Doyle has immaculate handwriting, and it's great when you come across authors who have that. Poe had that too. Poe's letters are beautifully written. You can always read them. Same thing with the manuscripts that have survived. But Doyle, for a doctor, had impeccable handwriting.
Oh, absolutely.
Well,
his handwriting is far better than mine. I mean, and I'm not even a doctor.
Let's do this story. I shared actually 2 PDFs of facsimiles for The Adventure of the Empty House, as it was originally published in October 1903 in the Strand, and also as it was published in America in Collier's magazine, which actually came out before the Strand. It came out at the end of September in 1903, and that was illustrated by Frederic Dorr Steele. And we will look at a couple images of that. You can find those PDFs on the Rosenbach Sherlock Mondays page. But this is October 1903, or September 03 in the American colors. It's 10 years after the final problem that Doyle has decided that we're going to continue the series. It was, well, he did the Hound, but really most of his time away, he made the most of concentrating not on Sherlock stories. So he wrote about, in those 10 years, he wrote about 60 stories, including almost, I think, all but one of the Brigadier Gerard stories, which are set in the Wars, and they're really good. 2 plays, 6 novels, and then dozens of articles, essays on travel, other subjects. And he also wrote a great deal of work on the Boer War in South Africa, in which he also served for a time as doctor. So over all this time, he had, in effect, by stopping writing Sherlock Holmes stories, I think in his mind at least, he had become the man of letters that he really wanted to be. Not just the author of detective stories, but author of many works, someone committed to current events. and he's also knighted. He's knighted for his services to the country, mainly for his support for the British in the Boer War. But you can't help but think that his Sherlock fame has helped contribute to being knighted as well. But
Or perhaps a little.
But it's the serious work that he's done and all the other things that he's written. And I mentioned The Hound of the Baskervilles, which was serialized in 1901 and 02.
Mm-hmm.
But that story is set before Final Problem. So Holmes didn't die, doesn't get resurrected. It's before he dies in Final Problem. But
yep.
More on The Hound in the special subscription only series, which starts on May 6th, and you can still register for that at rosenbach.org. Steve mentioned, Monica, that money helped bring this back.
Money. It's what makes the world go round.
Resurrection of Sherlock. I mean, I can't imagine that it's also not the popularity of Hound. He does another Sherlock story, and it's really popular. Like people,
well, people have wanted it for the last decade. I mean, to be honest, people have wanted this for the last decade. And yes, Hound was like exceedingly popular and amazing. But when you think about it, that popularity gave Doyle pretty much license to ask for whatever the heck he wanted because he knew the publishers would pony up. I think this would be his Jerry Maguire moment of show me the money.
Yeah. Well, he doesn't even have to ask because Collier's magazine comes up to him and says, listen, now there's dispute. And all different things. There's like they offered him $25,000 for 6 stories. They offered him 30 for 8. They offered him 45,000 for 13. What we do know is that he got 6,000, at least 6,000 for 6 stories. And that's actually about 26,000 pounds for 6 stories. And in the conversion rate at that time, that's actually about $25,000. So it is true that he got $25,000 for the first 6 stories, and then he expanded it to 8 and then to 12. As a matter of fact, and his only response to Collier's was a postcard he sent them when they offered him. And the postcard just says, very well, ACD. Didn't have to haggle. They offered him a lot of money. And he said yes. So
yeah. I mean, if somebody was going to offer you, we'll just say a king's ransom for doing something that you can put together. I mean, it's a short story, and yes, they're offering. I mean, but it's like, yes, please. Like if somebody offered me 6,000 pounds to do, like a week's worth of therapy sessions, I'd be in it to win it,
Well, and that's only for the American rights.
Exactly.
Then the Strand is like, hey, wait a minute. So, and that's Doyle, and Doyle sells the British rights to the Strand, so he stays in the Strand. So all of his Sherlock stories wind up in the Strand, up to the very end. But it actually, now it's before it had been published in the Strand, London, and there was a Strand American edition. And then he also, early on for the first 12 adventures, he had like lots of different newspapers were carrying them. Then he kind of narrowed it down, and there was usually only one other periodical, like Harper's Weekly was carrying it for a time. So his stories. But now, this later, it's Collier's magazine, which was weekly. And then they would have a monthly publication format as well, in which they would combine them all and sell them as a big monthly magazine. So let us look at the Colliers with this so great Frederic Dorr Steele
this cover.
Oh,
the cover
magazine. There it is.
So I gotta give a little bit of a shout out right now to the Norwegian explorers of Minnesota. Their original Scion pin, which when we're not looking at this cover, is actually a reproduction of the cover. So I have their original Scion pin with me.
And this is in this number, The Return of Sherlock Holmes, beginning a new series of detective stories by A. Conan Doyle up at the top here. And then this beautiful color, Frederic Dorr Steele illustration. 10 cents. This is a bargain, this magazine.
Cheap, 10 cents.
And then here's the first page here. This is their text. They have it as the return of Sherlock Holmes with, what is the like kind of a London, skyline, before skyscraper days. And it's by A. Conan Doyle, illustrated by F.D. Steele. Here's the first illustration we'll just do a little bit of Frederic Dorr now, and then I'll show some Paget illustrations. Here's the old bookseller. This is Holmes disguised as the bookseller. And here's Holmes revealing himself to Watson. Watson has just turned back around. Here's the wig on the desk. And it's Sherlock. So this is his first in-story illustration of Sherlock Holmes. And then this is at the end of the story when they're looking at the M collection of Holmes's scrapbooks. So
yes,
that's
my collection of.
Oh no. And now we get also Colonel Moran sprang forward with a snarl of rage. Here he is. So looking a little, I don't know. Well, maybe too old for, to be that dangerous. But hey, some people are really strong still.
I mean, strong,
it's
but
the
also
drooping
crack
mustache.
shots. A crack shot and and a temper.
So, but the Frederic Dorr Steele becomes really the most important illustrator of Sherlock Holmes after Sidney Paget. Over 160 illustrations for Collier's and then all various publications. And Dorr Steele, interestingly, Sidney Paget, we know, based Sherlock Holmes's appearance and look. The model was Paget's brother, Walter. Not really the description in the text, because he's a little better looking than the description in the text. And Dorr Steele uses William Gillette.
Yes, America's Sherlock Holmes. The sexy, stage Sherlock Holmes.
Gillette had been performing as Sherlock Holmes on stage in America, and it just now recently brought it to London, and it was a big hit. I think one of the reasons why Sherlock is getting so popular again at this stage, Hound of the Baskervilles, Gillette in William Gillette in this great stage production that goes on for many years, and Gillette becomes famous, and Dorr Steele takes pictures of Gillette and models his Sherlock Holmes on him. So let's look at go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say is that in the London production, if I recall correctly, a very, very young Charles Chaplin plays Billy the Page Boy.
That is true, yeah.
So I mean it's basically like William Gillette was this phenomenon and was brilliant and matinee idol good looking.
Yeah, here's the Strand cover. Again, it's the top of the cover of the issue. Sherlock Holmes by Conan Doyle, The Adventure of the Empty House. I think the previous month, the Strand had announced that like Sherlock Holmes is we thought he was dead, but he's coming back. And so it's not a surprise to the reader, unless you just didn't see the last issue. You're not keeping up on things, but this is the issue. And then here's before the story even starts, we get a picture, and this is towards the end of the story. Now, this also was the same in Final Problem, in which the story opens with a frontispiece of, in that case, the death of Sherlock. It's him and Moriarty at the falls. Here it's Sherlock and Moran has seized Holmes by the throat. So the scene of danger, and Watson's about to whack him on the head here with his gun. So, but we start off with an action shot right at the beginning of the story. And then when the story happens, it's the return of Sherlock Holmes. By A. Conan Doyle. They had actually asked him if he wanted to be Sir, and he refused himself. He said, no, I'm still A. Conan Doyle is the author. And The Adventure of the Empty House. So the adventure stays in here for the story titles, at least for now. All right. That's all the intro.
It's all good. So I'm gonna take like at this moment in this break, I gotta take a moment. Congratulations to Caitlin Clark for being the WNBA's #1 pick. Go Hawks. She just got drafted, according to all the notifications on my phone, to the Indiana Fever. So thank you for your indulgence there, Ed. We're very proud because she's Iowa's #1 export. More than corn, more than pigs and soybeans.
All righty.
There we go.
Let's look at the story. Let's look at the opening. It was the
Ah,
spring of the year 1894 that all London was interested in the fashionable world dismayed by the murder of the Honorable Ronald Adair under most
yes.
unusual and inexplicable circumstances. So, the uh um uh this is 1894. It's
Hmm.
being published in 1903.
Hmm.
Story set in 94. So it was
Yes,
3 years since his
yes.
death, because in Final Problem he says 1891.
One.
I
Yep.
mean, there's all kinds of chronological problems, because what we learn in the Final Problem from the last story 10 years ago was that Holmes had been dead for the entire time that the stories were being published in the Strand. Um,
Pretty
and
much.
and it's like, and so it winds up, it's really hard to, and so if Holmes is so famous from watching right of the stories as they talk about in those, how can they be? Because it's it the chrono Doyle doesn't, these are the kind of reasons that Doyle's not paying attention to chronology, and when you look at it, nothing quite matches up. You always have
This
to
is this is
distrust.
where the Sherlockians come to play, though. So I mean, not great chronologist equals great for game playing.
Yeah. And Watson, it says in the beginning of this now, to further complicate it, only now at the end of nearly 10 years am I allowed to supply those missing links which make up the whole of that remarkable chain.
Yes.
Um, the that he is he's had a he's had and then he goes on to say he's had to keep these facts secret for 10 years, and then he gets the greatest shock of his life.
Yep.
And it was a prohibition from Holmes's own lips, which made him stay silent for all these years. Sorry, everybody, he's been alive since 1894, and I'm only just telling you now.
Yeah. It's so cruel to the public, to the adoring public who desperately wants word that Sherlock Holmes is alive. But no, we're just gonna keep you all in the dark for a decade.
Um, but the reality of it all is that for the real readers, Sherlock Holmes was dead for 10 years. Doyle meant it. He killed, well, less than that, because Hound comes out,
Yeah.
before. So the Hound is out in 01 and 02. That's when he's brought Sherlock back. But because the story predates Final Problem,
Hmm.
public still thinks that they have read the death of Sherlock Holmes. Well, finally, they have not. Um, and and in the meantime, in the 3 years now, but it's 3 years in story time.
Hmm. Internal
Uh,
internal chronology.
yeah. Um, Watson has decided he wants to try to be more like Sherlock. Sherlock had interested him deeply in crime, and I even attempted more than once for my own private satisfaction to employ his methods in solutions of crimes, um, including, and Holmes would have laughed at this, um,
Yeah.
including this very recent murder of the Honorable Ronald Adair, the
Mhm.
second son of the Earl of Maynooth, at that time governor of one of the Australian colonies. So a big guy, like a big society person here.
Exactly. So
Um,
I'm going to attach myself to the most famous case that's available
yeah.
just because I can.
And he was murdered um, between the hours of 10 and 11:20 on the night of March 30th, 1894. And then we get the backstory. He was fond of playing cards at these
Mhm.
clubs and he had a partnership with Colonel Moran. What was his whist playing partner? Little tidbit here. My grandmother's maiden name is Moran. There you go. So, and my youngest daughter, Lulu, Moran is her middle name. She's Lulu Moran Pettit. So there you go. So we have Morans.
Secretly Sherlockian, and you didn't even know it.
The second most dangerous family in Jenkintown. There you go. And Adair's shot and killed, but it's like a
locked room mystery.
Yeah. And it's referred to more than once in the story as the Park Lane mystery, where he lived. That Adair is found shot in the head, his head's blown apart because it was an expanding bullet, which means it's a soft nose bullet. So when they strike, they kind of expand.
Yeah, it mushrooms.
Cause a ton of damage.
Yeah.
But his money's on the table, and he looks like he was taking notes, but it's names of people, and so maybe he owed the money or figuring out his winnings. But the door is locked. The window, it's they're on the it's a few stories up, so nobody left by the window, and so they don't. How did he die? Well, Watson tries to think like Holmes. That's he says, I turned the facts over in my mind, endeavoring to hit upon some theory which would reconcile them all. That's not what Holmes does, Watson, right? We've had this in the stories.
Yes, yes. We data. We cannot make bricks without clay. Gotta basically have the theories have the theories suit the facts, not twist the facts to suit the theories.
And Holmes would find the trifling things within this description of how he was killed, and the things that are unusual about it, and then would proceed to put together a chain of how this could have occurred with these things. Not coming up with one theory that makes it all work. That's exactly how you're not supposed to do it, John.
Yeah. Naughty John. Did you learn nothing from your time with Sherlock Holmes?
Well, he does at least go to the scene of the crime, but he only just goes to look. He's standing outside looking, bunch of loafers, everybody's out there talking about the case, because it's famous. He sees a tall, thin man with colored glasses, whom I strongly suspected of being a plainclothes detective.
Yeah.
You have to think, if you're an OA reader, you're like, is that Sherlock? Is Sherlock there?
Tall, thin man.
It seems like, and he's in disguise, got the glasses, but that's not the disguise. Then this is doing well as a good plotter, throwing us off here, in that he first has Watson see someone else. So if you're going to be on the alert for Sherlock showing up, there's your attention. Then he bumps into an elderly, deformed man and knocks books down. So it's the second person, and that may have helped throw some people off. That it wasn't.
It's a good deflection. Which is what I like, kind of like take the third cab, or take the third cab and not the second.
He knocks his books out. One of the books is The Origin of Tree Worship. And it struck me that the fellow must be some poor bibliophile who, either as a trade or as a hobby, was a collector of obscure volumes. Now, this isn't a call out to Dr. Rosenbach, but it certainly fits the bill in this kind of, way that people thought of bibliophiles and book collectors then. And I think this is one of the reasons that Dr. Rosenbach loved having this story and having it in his personal collection, because of Holmes is disguised as the poor bibliophile.
Oh, that's perfect. And I mean, it's kind of like if I could, I'd own the Scandal on Bohemia one just because of the Church of St. Monica. Like if I had the money and I could, it would make sense.
Well, the old bookseller snarls at him and turns away. And then Watson begins, my observations of number 427 Park Lane did little to clear up the problem.
Mhm.
because you're just standing outside looking at the building, Watson. You're not really, going to get too much info there. Sherlock would, of course. Sherlock would say, he would already have all the things that happen in the room and already have a great idea of how they happen, and then he just needs to confirm it all. And all
Yep.
Sherlock needs to do is be on the street and say, where do I need to be in the next building or down here that I would have a
Mhm.
clear shot at him? And then,
And
um, good. We got a few minutes before we take a break, a few minutes, and we'll reveal the next biblioventure. There were a lot of guesses earlier. People were starting to guess Christopher Morley too. It's Christopher Morley. So you'll find out. They uh and then this is where we have the well, Watson goes home. And I got confused reading this the first time. It's for anybody else.
Mhm.
He's not at Baker Street. And I kept
Yeah,
thinking, wait, they were already there. They're not at Baker Street. It's Watson's house. Uh,
yes. Watson moved out of the flat at Baker Street a while back.
yes. No.
Kind of was married, that whole thing.
He goes back to Kensington and he's in his study and the strange old book collector comes in and I'm sorry, I was mean to you and you bumped in and you picked up the books. Watson says, you make too much of a trifle, which is
Uh,
fun with Sherlock talking about trifles. And then the great moment, why don't we
uh,
do it? Why don't we do it from the manuscript? Uh,
ooh. This is the moment. This is the page that I
Here
have
it
my
is.
selfie with. Oh my gosh.
Here it is. And it starts up here. I moved my head to look at the cabinet behind me. When I turned again, Sherlock Holmes was standing smile at me across my study table. I rose to my feet, stared at him for some seconds in utter amazement, and then it appears that I must have fainted for the first and the last time in my life. Certainly a gray mist swirled before my eyes, and when it cleared, I found my collar ends undone and the tingling aftertaste of
Oh,
brandy
Andy.
upon my lips. Holmes was bending over my chair, his flask in his hand. My dear Watson, said the well-remembered voice, I owe you a
Oh, you.
thousand apologies. I had no idea that you would be so affected. Um, what a great reveal from that. It's the skies. He has them, and what he tells us, he says, "Oh, there's you have a gap on the second shelf,
So
so you can have some
yeah,
books
so he
here
looks, he
from me."
turns, and yeah,
Um,
it's such a perfect look at what the left hand is doing while the right hand is manipulating things. It's
and the
such a
metaphor works too, right? Because there has been a gap on the
in this
bookshelf. There's been no Sherlock Holmes stories, and now
exactly.
here he is to help fill the gap.
Oh, it's perfect. Now, I mean, in the Granada series with Jeremy Brett, I think this was extraordinarily well handled in terms of the adaptation of this particular scene. Um, Edward Hardwicke. So in the beginning of the series, it's David Burke playing Watson, and then David Burke left the series so he could spend more time with family. Handpicked his replacement, Edward Hardwicke, and so Hardwicke is kind of like the older, more seasoned Watson, less kind of like um, young Watson, eager. This is now the Watson who basically has endured 3 years of thinking his friend, his comrade was dead. And it works. The transition between the two actors works. And Edward Hardwicke pulls this off
Yeah.
so incredibly well. Now, as far as, I think what is more true to life would be how the BBC series with Benedict Cumberbatch and Martin Freeman handled this scene, which is Martin Freeman punching Sherlock Holmes in the face for having kept him in the dark for X number of years.
It's
It's
complicated. It's more
it's
complicated too for that
yeah.
series because, all right, this is going to be a spoiler. So, like, don't listen for a second here. If you haven't seen the Cumberbatch Sherlock, you don't want the spoiler. What he does is he's planned the whole thing. In the stories, Sherlock didn't plan to be dead. he
Yeah.
literally thought he was going to be killed, and then
Yeah.
doesn't reveal after that. But
Yes.
in the other thing, it's an entire elaborate plan that Watson is not in on. And that's different. That
Yeah.
is somebody who's, intentionally knowing that they're going to fool him, not after the fact in order to accomplish something, not tell him.
No,
That's
and that's fair. I also recognize in our much more emotions forward, era in which we live. I can see even in if this text were written today that Watson would have a much bigger emotional reaction versus a much more internal one of the fainting. I think there would probably be some anger and rage there
uh,
briefly.
here's the
But
Paget
yeah,
reveal. Here's the Paget illustration
mhm,
for that.
yeah.
There's sure so we don't get the faint. I almost wished he showed Watson fainting back in
Painting.
his
Yeah.
chair. Would have been funnier. But here's Sherlock, and it's the reaching out his hand. It's part of it is ta-da, here I am, but the other part, but the visual is he's reaching for Watson, and I think
Mhm.
there's this connection there
Yeah.
between the two of them that Paget seems to understand in many of his illustrations,
Yeah.
that he draws them as if they're friends, not just two men in the same room. Uh,
Yeah.
and there's little things you can see in Paget that kind of connect them. Here, it's very subtle, but here I think it's the hand reaching out to
Yeah.
Watson.
That's I mean what Morley referred to it as a textbook of friendship. And so, this is we'll just say
Real,
I think Morley picked up on that
yeah.
in part, because of the stories, but also because of Paget's illustrations.
And
There
Watson's
is
face.
something very fraternal about this.
Look at his face. He's very
Yeah,
surprised.
he's stunned.
All righty.
I love that.
Well, we'll take our mid break.
I think
Uh,
that's valid right here.
yeah, I think that we need to do that. I think, time for our reveal of the next Biblioventures show beginning in September 2024. But first, I do have to say this, but first, I have to take this moment to thank all of you for watching this episode. As a nonprofit organization, the Rosenbach Museum and Library depends on the generosity of friends and supporters like you to keep programs like this free and accessible to thousands of fellow Sherlockians worldwide. I hope you will consider supporting the Rosenbach and Sherlock Mondays by donation, which you can do at our website. You could also become a member. That also helps support us. And it's this kind of support that allows us to do Biblioventures shows. Biblioventures started back in May 2020, when I had to move home to work. The pandemic hit. I had to move home, come up with programs to keep people invested in the Rosenbach's collections, but also as a way to do a week-to-week show to really get people to stay attached. And what we wound up doing is creating a community of readers around each of the books we've chosen for the series. We started with Dracula, and then it was Frankenstein, and then Jane Eyre, and then Pride and Prejudice. This year, Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes stories. And each of the books we have chosen are key treasures in our collections here at the Rosenbach. So, which book are we choosing for our next series in the fall? It's going to be two books for back-to-back 6-part series. September, October, November, December. The first book is Robert Louis Stevenson's Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Ooh, this is going to be fabulous.
So excited to do that. The second book, Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. Work real nicely, go from November into December, just before Christmas for the live shows. Jekyll and Hyde, Christmas Carol. We're calling it Biblioventures, Monsters and Ghosts. You can register for it now. our chat. Mrs. Hudson has just put it up there in the chat. You can register. Who will be the first one to register? I'll check and I'll find out. The Rosenbach has a first edition of Jekyll and Hyde, the Scribner's New York from 1886, actually preceded the London edition by several days. So the edition we have is the true first. Stevenson's Gothic masterpiece about a gentleman doctor whose strange experiments lead to his experiments to eradicate the evil impulses of all mankind lead to the creation of a brutal monster. I used to teach this book very often back in my teaching days. It is long a favorite of mine. I am so happy the Rosenbach now has a first edition of it, which was acquired not that long ago. And I think it's so prescient today, this book.
Oh, totally.
And we're going to move, and we're going to do over 6 weeks, and then we'll take a week off. And then we're going to do 6 weeks. We're going to move from monsters to ghosts with really the most famous ghost story of all time, if you really want to think about it. Dickens's Christmas Carol, Scrooge, Tiny Tim, Redemption. Sure, it's got all that stuff, but it's also a story about a man haunted by ghosts, haunted by his own past, haunted
by his conscience.
Haunted by his future. It's funny, it's scary, it really works, and it'll be great to do these two 19th century supernatural works back to back. I love monster books. People know me. We started with Dracula and Frankenstein for these, so I get to go and play on the monster book field again, which I really love. Our Christmas Carol is it's a true first edition, first printing of the book, meaning that very first printing, which sold out so quickly, within a week, has different end papers in it than the next printing. So they're green end papers, and then the green was coming off, so then they switched to yellow. So the green end papers one is how you know. There's also something in one of the titles for one of the stave titles. There's something that that it's a first. But this one is especially, because it was a presentation copy, because this is one of Dickens's copies that he got, and he presented it to his friend, Dr. Elliotson, and it's dated, I think, 21st December, 1843. And he gave it to his friend, Dr. Elliotson. Elliotson is the one who taught Dickens how to hypnotize people. And I mean literally, not just with his pen, with his stories. He was a practicing hypnotist and treated people with hypnotism. So tried to cure them of things, and did this throughout his life.
Interesting.
So, and that's a great association copy. Oh, I'll give you all kinds of info on that. So it's a great
I'm excited for that
copy to have is the one he gave to Dr. Elliotson. So we don't have the co-host for it yet. Maybe we can get the Ghoul Guides to come, the Ghoul Guides to come back. That would be awesome. We'll see. But we'll have some great co-hosts for it for both of the series. Jekyll and Hyde, beginning September 23, and then to October 28, and then from November 11 to December 16. But it's one registration for both of the books. Fall, Biblioventures, Monsters and Ghosts. Registration is now open. I hope you will join me for this Biblioventure. It should be a lot of fun. So, and I think nobody guessed it. So,
did a good job keeping this under wraps.
Yeah. So, it's great because they are both small, so you can't do a great deal of episodes on them, especially Jekyll. I mean, 6 is really like, I don't think I could do more.
Yeah, it's about right. But the nice thing is like what Les Klinger did the annotated Jekyll and Hyde. So, you've got
I get to have Les Klinger back. How about that?
You get to have Les back. It's always nice to have Les around.
That's his last annotated book too, I think. So, or the last one he's done, I mean.
I think so.
But of course, everyone, next week is our final episode of Sherlock Mondays. We'll have a fun wrap-up of the entire series with 3 of our co-hosts. Mary Alcaro, Monica Schmidt will come back, and Anastasia Klimchinskaya. Curtis can't make it next week, but Curtis will be back for our special subscription-only series, which you can still register for, Hound of the Baskervilles, which begins May 6th runs all the Mondays in May and June. And remember, if you miss one of those 8, they're going to be recordings that if you're registered for the show, you will be able to watch.
Oh,
So
good. Okay, now I'm definitely going to have to register because I have to go back and
you don't have to
continue
register. You don't have to
Oh,
register.
oh, I
We
don't have to
appreciate your
register?
support, though. It's very nice of
Oh,
you.
well, I will. Oh, okay. I will roll with that. No, but I will just say my therapy clients miss my Monday 5 p.m. and 6 p.m.
Yeah.
Central appointments, so I
Yeah.
kind of have to resume those at some point.
Mondays are tough. So I have one Monday off in between this and Hound, and it's already on our calendar at home, my wife and I, date night. So
Well, as one
you know, we get a Monday off. And people don't want to miss our wrap-up show next week.
no.
Not only to wrap the series up, because I'm going to reveal another program that I think you'll all be interested in. Not only do we have Jekyll, Hyde, and Scrooge in the fall, there's going to be something else. You have to tune in next week to find that out. I love the tease. So next week, I'll reveal another wonderful thing, another wonderful program from the Rosenbach and on the final show. So great. Whew. All right. I gotta get a refill here.
Oh, this is going to be a lot of fun.
Reviver. Just as has been revived. There you go.
Cheers, Ed.
Cheers. I also love this idea that this isn't a parable. Doyle's not C.S. Lewis, right? But
Yeah.
the whole resurrection of the hero here, in Christian culture, it winds up being a very predominant mythic feature. When you have a great hero, they die in some way and then they come back.
Often sacrificing themselves for the greater good. Yeah.
Which is exactly what Sherlock did. And for me, though, it's especially like it's a King Arthur moment in a sense. And it's that one day he'll return. And he has now. Sherlock is the once and future detective, meaning maybe he will come back again. And he does. He comes back in movies and all kinds of other books and stories. He is the undying detective.
Well, he never lived and so can never die.
Yeah. So, all righty. Well, also, the first thing he says to Watson is, "My dear Watson." 9 times in this story, he says, "My dear Watson."
Yeah.
And then once he also says, "My dear fellow," and he also says, "Dear chap." 11 times he says dear to Watson.
He missed his bestie.
Yeah,
he missed his bestie.
They're close.
Yeah.
And that kind of affection I really like. It's one thing to just say it once and you can look at, and then he called him, "My dear Watson." It's the repetition over and over in the story really illustrates their bond throughout.
Yeah.
So, well, Watson.
I was just gonna say, where has Holmes been?
How I saw, how did you succeed in climbing out of that awful abyss? He touches him to make sure you're not a spirit anyhow. It's like Scrooge here, right? You're not a spirit anyhow, my dear chap. And Holmes proceeds to sit down and light a cigarette.
Oh, yes.
Cigarettes are comforting. We haven't done the cigarette on the show. But in his old nonchalant manner. He's thinner and keener than of old. Watson can see that he's had a tough time of it, maybe of late, at least in the last 3 years. Holmes, this is what Holmes jokes at, "Oh, you have to take I had to take a foot off of my stature to play the old bookseller." And before he even explains everything that happens, he's like, "Wait, do you want to come with me tonight?"
Like, I have an adventure. Let's go play. It's so perfect. It's like, let's pick up literally where we left off.
Yeah.
Like no time has passed. I just realized as I'm thinking about this, oh my God, there's a paper right here that I need to read at some point about Holmes, kind of like jumping back into where he was, even though he has sympathy and empathy for Watson. It's like, okay, I'm back. It's good. Let's pick up where we left off now.
Yeah. So first, cigarette. Second, you're going to come with me tonight, right? For something? Now third, all right, now I'll tell you what's
Okay.
so
As long as you're okay for it. I mean, it is very sensitive of Holmes to check with Watson to make sure that he's okay for this.
yes. But he has to know right off the bat before he even tells him, man, I gotta know if you're gonna come with me. Well,
And yeah,
but also Sherlock
priorities.
must know that this is important for Watson. Watson,
Yeah.
he knows that he loves this, so he's able to give him something.
Hmm.
Holmes describes the final fight with Moriarty. And then what Watson didn't know is Holmes says, I have some knowledge, however, of Baritsu. We'll get that in a sec.
Yes.
Or the Japanese system of wrestling, which has more than once been useful to me. And then he uses that, and Moriarty goes off the cliff, not him. Baritsu, which is not the right spelling, right?
Bartitsu, I believe, is the appropriate spelling.
Bartitsu is the name of this martial art, designed specifically by a man by the name of Edward William Barton Wright, who worked in Japan, studied martial arts there as well, where he worked in businesses there, and then he develops his own system of self-defense. And
Mhm.
the Bart in it is from his name Barton, and
Mhm.
Itsu from jujitsu. So he's
Yep.
actually combined these for it. Collier's magazine for this edition, for this story, doesn't print Baritsu or Bartitsu, which would have been the right spelling. They actually put jujitsu in it in the American edition. Now, usually what we find in the American editions of Sherlock Holmes stories is that they're usually more faithful to the manuscript. Uh,
Mhm.
and in this case, it's not. The manuscript says Baritsu, and they've changed it because I wonder if the editor thought that's not real. He means jujitsu.
Mhm.
So they had changed it because this thing that Edward William Barton Wright had done, he had found his own Bartitsu School of Arms and Physical Culture. It had like a little storefront, 67B, Shaftesbury Avenue in the Soho district. Um, and but he wasn't like hugely popular, influential in a sense.
Mhm.
Like there was people that knew this. There's a great image of him that was made, but I think it might have been made by the person who put together the Wikipedia page, and it's a montage. It's a collage of him, and this is him in the middle. And these are all actual pictures from the articles that he
Hmm.
published on Bartitsu. So this isn't like it almost seems like this is a parrot, like this isn't real. This is somebody. No,
Yeah.
these were
Well,
the pictures published.
yeah. So the funny thing is, a couple of years back, there was this really fantastic website called thinkgeek.com. It's now owned by GameStop, and it's basically been like gutted. But they actually had a gentleman's guide to Baritsu.
Yeah.
So the Sherlock Holmes Guide to Baritsu, and I didn't realize that the illustrations, or rather these photos that were featured in that book, were actually William Barton. I mean, that's
Yeah.
that's that's mind blowing. So that's pretty cool.
You can look him up online. You can find there's a couple websites that have printed his entire the articles that he wrote about this, practice that he formed, and with the pictures and everything. So you can find all this stuff online. It's really fascinating. But this is what Holmes knows too, and this is how he uses to get rid of Moriarty, who with a horrible scream kicked madly for a few seconds and clawed the air with both his hands. I saw him fall for a long way. Then he struck a rock, bounded off, and splashed into the water. So, and Sherlock stops, takes a couple puffs of a cigarette, and then continues. I can't help but mention it. And the makes me want to have a cigarette.
Well, no, I mean, it's like at that point, okay, yeah, it's the adrenaline, the nicotine, gotta calm myself down. Yeah, I get it.
Watson is like, what about the tracks? I saw the track. Like, I did your method. I followed the footprints. And then Holmes let him know that he actually climbed the cliff face to get out of there.
Yeah.
And because the instant he disappeared, that Moriarty died, the instant Holmes formulated a plan that I'm going to now be dead because I know there's other people in his gang who are after me. And so I can now pretend that I'm dead.
Exactly.
So he approaches this confrontation with Moriarty thinking, okay, I might die. And that's okay. I can die as long as I get rid of Moriarty. And that's why he allows Watson to go off from the fake letter. Holmes is like, I'm going to die. It's okay if I sacrifice myself. I've already, if I can get rid of Moriarty, it's worth it. And then after he wins, then he thinks, oh, well, I'll pretend I'm dead so I can then, because these guys will be after me, and then I can get them, in a sense, is what he winds up happening in this story.
Yeah. Well, he has to play the long game, just because, there's so many of Moriarty's henchmen that are aware that he's alive, and that will be coming after him. He has to disappear. He has to play the long game if he wants to survive.
Yeah. And then not only survive, but he says they would lay themselves open if they think he's dead. And sooner or later, I could destroy them.
Yeah.
So now it's a real adventure. It was in the last story, but now we're getting the description of what happened. He climbs the ledge, and then he gets on a ledge and he watches Watson and the police come back.
Oh yes, and this is the front cover illustration of the Colliers. I'm gonna hope my camera does this right, but this is and it's probably not going to zoom in properly. But it is definitely a likeness of that. Yeah, this is the original Norwegian explorer's scion pin, and treasured possession of mine, just because they've been unavailable for many, many years, and this was a gift from a deceased friend. So it's very meaningful for me to have my friend Dick's Norwegian explorer's pin, but also the artwork is just exquisite.
As he was climbing too, I forgot to mention that Holmes mentions that I seem to hear Moriarty's voice screaming at me
from
the abyss. So
yes.
Hence the title
Out of the Abyss.
Simile edition, but that's just a haunting thing there. Because Watson earlier had, in Final Problem, had said like this, it's like a voice coming up at you from the bottom.
So it's a perfect callback.
Well, Holmes says he watched them up there as all you're following were investigating in the most sympathetic and inefficient manner the circumstances of my death. So he starts to get some commentary on, you guys don't even know what you're doing down there.
Good attempts, y'all suck.
Suddenly rocks start coming down and he looks up, he sees a man's head against the sky, somebody's throwing rocks down, so there's somebody after me already. And then it's this quick description of a little more than that, but first, I love the first that, I took to my heels, did 10 miles over the mountains in the darkness, and a week later, I found myself in Florence. It's almost as if he's saying, and then I ran to Florence. I ran to Italy.
Yes. Actually, I love this this time. This is the beginning of what we would call the Great Hiatus. The 3 years that Holmes is presumed dead, and traveling to various places. First destination, Florence.
Yes. He tells Watson that Mycroft was in on it the whole time because he would send him money. He also kept Baker Street, set up there so Holmes could return someday. Of course, Watson never mentions this, and it must have seemed weird. Like, why is Mycroft keeping a shrine to, Sherlock? For that reason, so there are some Sherlockians who don't believe that Watson thought he was dead, that this is all a cover story because Watson knew from the start. But Holmes tells Watson that his affectionate regard would tempt some indiscretion, and he couldn't have that happen.
Which actually does make sense, though. It's like, if you tell one of your bestie, a secret, your bestie's gonna and then trust them for the next X number of years to keep that secret. You know, what is the saying? Is like two people can keep a secret if one of them is dead.
What's going to happen if someone reveals some incredible thing to Sherlock Holmes? He's just going to take it in stride. What happens when you reveal something to Watson? He faints. You
He
can't.
faints, and
He's
then he
not the
writes about it.
person who's going to be able to keep in what he feels about something. So,
Yeah.
and it's not just
Yeah,
that.
and
The
he's
revelation of
not
that.
he's not going to be able to walk around London convincingly like my friend is dead. He's going to be like, okay, someday Sherlock Holmes will return. No,
Yeah.
yeah,
He would just give it away
Watson,
without knowing it. And that's when
yeah,
Holmes.
Watson has a good heart, and that's why he couldn't be told.
That seems reasonable to me. But the two most dangerous of Moriarty's gang are left free. Do we ever? Well, yeah, we do learn later who the second one is, but he doesn't factor into the story. Well, I think we do, but Moran is one. And then it's the Great Hiatus,
Ah, yes, the
as it's
hiatus.
called by Sherlockians. 2 years in Tibet, where
Oh,
he met
yes.
not an animal llama, because Doyle misspells it with two L's in the front, but the llama, the head llama, he calls him, which he means some, Tibetan head. And it
Yeah,
might mean the
basically
Dalai
the head of a
Lama,
monastery.
might mean the head of a monastery.
Yeah, I wrote a delightful essay. To bet you weren't. Actually, it was yeah, to bet you weren't listening. The idea that that Holmes actually went to Tibet to be to engage in the practice of meditation and mindfulness. Because think about if you see, but you do not observe. Holmes is the most amazing reasoning machine and
Mhm.
observing machine. And in order to observe the things that Holmes does, you have to be fully engaged in the present and fully
Yeah.
mindful. Maria Konnikova actually wrote an entire book about this, Mastermind: How to Think Like Sherlock Holmes, and it's absolutely fascinating. And from a clinical perspective, I mean, she got her PhD from Harvard in psychology, so she's far more qualified than even I am to speak on this. But as a clinician in practice, I will fully validate everything that she wrote in that book, and the essay that I basically wrote, kind of summarizing what she wrote, which is, that Holmes was a great practitioner of mindfulness. And so 2 years in Tibet to
It is a
hone in
long
on his
time too. It's
mindfulness.
two of the
It's
3 years.
exactly. I mean, and if, I mean, we'll just say, since we're like athletes in this day and age, a lot of them actually are including the concept of mindfulness as part of their training, meditation and mindfulness to basically calm the anxiety and, keep focused during game time and to basically keep from getting the yips, if you will.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it does have even, I mean, very practical applicability. And so, they're thinking like Holmes. So I can see that this theory that I have kind of holds some water,
Yeah. Oh,
or at
yeah.
least a reasonably convincing argument.
Absolutely. Well, it's not just in Tibet. Then he tells him that Watson may have heard of the remarkable explorations of a Norwegian named Sigerson.
Sigerson, the Norwegian
The
explorer.
Norwegian explorers, the Scion Society. Cheers to all you guys up in
Cheers to
Minnesota.
Minnesota.
Yeah.
Oh yes, and Minnesota's conference is almost sold out. So the end of July conference. So if you want to go and you haven't registered, you need to act quickly. Last time I checked, I think they had less than 5 slots available
Wow.
before
Wow.
selling out.
All righty. Well, they not only is he traveling around pretending he's a Norwegian explorer named Sigerson, he passes through Persia, he visits the Caliph at Khartoum,
Hmm.
goes to Mecca. At Khartoum, he passes on communications to the Foreign Office, so he's kind of acting as a spy. And then he goes to France for a few months to research coal tar derivatives.
Yes.
All this. But that was only in a year because the 2 years was in
In
Tibet.
Tibet.
Although part of that time could have been as the Norwegian explorer in the Himalayas or something. We don't know. So I like the Khartoum collection because that's the city where General Gordon died. And that's the
Hmm.
picture that Watson has on his wall of General Gordon that Holmes describes in the beginning of Cardboard Box. He's got the General Gordon and the Henry Ward Beecher pictures in
Oh,
that
yes. And
wallpaper.
actually, General Charles Gordon, just for a little bit of Sherlockian slash BSI trivia, is actually the original investiture of Michael Keene, who is the current Wiggins of the BSI.
There you go.
So, it's always good to know who's who in the zoo, so to speak.
Well, coal tar derivatives. For those who don't know, I of course know. I had to look it all up. It's funny, I never looked that up before. I just always passed it over like, oh yeah, that's just some
Okay,
chemical.
that thing, yeah.
But what it is apparently coal tar, which is what you think it is, the product of coal from production of coke, high carbon fuel. But the
Yeah.
derivatives of it also have I'm sure you knew this, have painkilling properties, including acetaminophen, which you
Yep.
get in Tylenol and all kinds of other
Yeah,
things.
Advil and all that.
I
Yeah.
didn't know. I never knew that. That was something new that I discovered online, reading that. Never thought that. So,
Yeah, like who knew that that our Tylenol, is kind of derived
and it's
from
not anymore. Now they
but
use it
the
for a different
original.
way. Yeah.
Yeah.
But originally it was these coal tar derivatives. That's what you get. But I love the idea that is it actually painkillers that Holmes is is he doing something to help him get through the times when he's not on cases? I don't know.
Well, I guess in the giant scheme of things, if we're looking at the concept of harm reduction between cocaine and morphine,
Yeah,
acetaminophen is definitely a step
that's a better one.
directionally correct step. So we would call that harm reduction in my field. I will take it. Oh, yes.
When Holmes is in France, he discovers that only one of his enemies is now left in London, and this would be Moran. Um, and as soon as so he comes home, when he hears about the Park Lane mystery, like the expanding bullet, the mystery, Holmes right away is like, that's Colonel Moran. I know who did that. Like reading an account in a French news in a newspaper while he's living in France, he solves the case.
Oh, yes.
But it's inside knowledge. Just because he knows who Moran is, nobody else does. None of the police force, really nobody knows that Moran is this dangerous, evil.
Yeah, I mean, he has every air of respectability.
Yeah. And he comes back to London, calls at Baker Street, threw Mrs. Hudson into violent hysterics.
Well, if you think your charge is dead, and then you just suddenly show up again, the Granada series handles this also extraordinarily well. Yeah, it's I mean it's I have to admit it actually kind of makes me a little misty thinking about Rosalie Williams's response, just because it felt so legitimately heartfelt. So
I haven't rewatched it. What I generally do is when there is a Granada, I watch it after we do the show. Because sometimes when they make changes, and they do great things with their changes. I know the changes they make in Empty House. I know the ones that they did in Final Problem. They're really great changes, but then I'm always afraid I'm going to get confused talking about the story, so I wait till afterwards.
Yeah, I binge the audiobook of this like back to back like 6 or 7 times, and then I go and watch the Granada episode if it's available. And just because I like to kind of note the differences. Plus, it's fun to torture my poor husband with watching the Granada series again.
Well, Sherlock shocks Mrs. Hudson, and then the rooms are preserved, and now he sits down in my old room, only wishing that I could have seen my old friend Watson in the other chair, which he had so often adorned. All he needs now is
Watson.
So
it's like the greatest bromance, and that's what I love about this. This is bromance. This is two guys that genuinely love and care for each other, and it's not sexual. Although there are plenty of people who do theorize that it was, and there's plenty of interesting and compelling papers about that.
If it was, you wouldn't know it. If it was, Watson wasn't going to put it in the accounts.
Oh, no. And Watson also was very bragging about 3 continents Watson. So, 3 continents John.
All part of the subterfuge. He doesn't want people to know. I'm totally okay with, these guys.
Yeah.
But and then he's, that's now we get to mention Watson. It says, in some manner, he, Holmes, had learned of my own sad bereavement, and his sympathy was shown in his manner rather than in his words. Work is the best antidote to sorrow, my dear Watson. So, although Doyle doesn't say it, what we're supposed to recognize is that Mrs. Watson has died.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
I have an alternate theory on this, but
oh, there's a lot of alternate
oh
theories.
yes,
Sure.
I have an alternate theory. It's a fun one, but it's because of the chronology and all the other issues. I theorize, and this is bad of me to admit, but I believe there's only one Mrs. Watson. And
Yeah.
the reason is just because when you think about it, what if like Holmes and Watson are kind of like the celebrities of their day. And if, let's say, Mrs. Watson lost a child, we don't want her to be hounded by the press. We don't want her to basically be hounded in the same way that actors and other famous people are often like bombarded by paparazzi and by fans and other things. It's hard being famous. It's I realize everybody wants to, or I shouldn't say everybody, but a large portion of people want to be famous, or they dream of being famous and rich and whatnot. But it's like there's also like the price of fame. Holmes and Watson were famous. And if Mrs. Watson lost a child, what is one of the best ways to basically distract the adoring public from hounding Mrs. Watson in her bereavement, and Dr. Watson their bereavement, other than playing with funky chronology throughout the entire stories
Uh-huh.
and basically, referencing a bereavement without necessarily referencing what it actually is.
Yeah,
I'm out there.
they all these theories always work because there's
Too many
well,
holes.
but you have to like do it all. But for me, she needs to be dead because Doyle needs to make it easier. He needs Watson to be in Baker Street with
Baker Street,
Sherlock,
yeah.
living with Holmes. And I it's funny. I think that if he had realized that he was going to be continuing the stories after Sign of Four and doing these short stories, he never would have married him. He
No,
just
no, no, no. It's well,
would have
that's
the two boys in Baker Street as bachelors solving crimes.
well, that's one of the reasons why the Granada series basically completely did away with the idea of
Yeah.
Mrs. Watson, just because it was just too complicated to try to
Yeah.
explain why Watson wasn't present, and the varying bouncing between addresses and such.
Doyle now solves that. He doesn't need to, deal with, Watson being at home sometimes and Holmes calling on him, or when does the story take place? Now the story and most, not all, most of the stories from now on are post Final Problem when you do
Yeah.
chronologies. So most, not all. He will still go back and do those, but it is it's an easier way to come up with stories if they're both just living in Baker Street. Well, then he says, after all this, Holmes is like, okay, now I'm going to tell you all about my adventures over those 3 years. Oh, we don't get to hear them. He tells Watson, but we don't get to hear it. That is such a bummer. So, but it's not a bummer because then this is what Sherlockians can do now.
Is basically inserts fun fan fiction
Create
in
the
between.
adventures that Holmes
Exactly.
had during the hiatus.
Yes.
Well, now, just as Holmes said earlier, like old times, now it is Watson as they're going out this night. Holmes says, we're going to start on the notable adventure of the empty house. And Watson says, I'm just going to read this paragraph. It was indeed like old times when at that hour I found myself seated beside him in a hansom, my revolver in my pocket, and the thrill of adventure in my heart. Holmes was cold and stern and silent. As the gleam of the street lamps flashed upon his austere features, I saw that his brows were drawn down in thought and his thin lips compressed. I knew not what wild beast we were about to hunt down in the dark jungle of criminal London, but I was well assured from the bearing of this master huntsman that the adventure was a most grave one, while the sardonic smile which occasionally broke through his ascetic gloom boded little good for the object of our quest. That's
I think that increased my heart rate just a little bit. I got a little excited there.
That's just pure Sherlock stories. This is what we come for.
Exactly.
And
The unadulterated joy of this.
that encapsulation that Doyle puts together there. These are the thrill of the stories. The hansom cab, the revolver in my pocket. Holmes is the hunter. I love that. So it did make me wonder because, Doyle was such an outdoor adventurist. Any outdoor sport, he was into it. He was not a big game hunter from what I have been able to gather. He liked fox hunting for a time, and I would love somebody correct me on this if I'm wrong. I don't think he ever pursued hunting, especially game hunting, as an outdoor sport. That's his son did. Adrian did. Adrian was well known as a big game hunter. From all the money his dad left him from Sherlock. But Doyle himself, I don't think was engaged as a hunter, especially not a big game hunter.
I don't think so, but I can. This is where I would normally consult Mark Alberstadt, who's a fellow BSI member. Mark used to be the head of IT for the province of Nova Scotia, but his his kind of area of study is actually Arthur Conan Doyle and sports. So he's my go-to resource for sports.
I do know that he liked fox hunting and for a time was really into it, but then it didn't continue with it later in life. But but anyway, if I found it otherwise, I'll put it in the comments of the video here. Well, they ride around here and then they get out. They get out of the cab at Cavendish Street, and then they do this winding route through all these mews and alleys. And Watson thinks they're near Baker Street, but then they're off wandering all around, and they wind up the back of an old gloomy house. And a narrow passage, a wooden gate, and then they go into this house, and Holmes says, "Do you know where we are?" And Watson realizes right away by looking out the window, surely that is Baker Street. So I'm picturing a sign out there saying Baker Street too. And Holmes says, exactly, we are in Camden House, which stands opposite to our own old quarters. So you can find lots of great little Sherlockian articles over the years, really starting to be written as early as possible. I think in the 1930s about where, or even earlier, about where Baker Street 221B actually was and where Camden House is, and people identifying which buildings would have been then. Because, of course, in Sherlock's time, there was no 221 Baker. It didn't extend that far. Than there was later. So how do you reconcile that? And there's a lot of great, interesting things, because what they wind up doing is you wind up with all these maps of the area. And I love maps, but you can, it really helps situate the geography of Baker Street and those houses when you read these conjectural pieces. So they're in this house, and they look across to Baker Street because they can see the window. Watson's like I can see the familiar window, and he sees the shadow of a man who was seated in a chair was thrown in hard black outline upon the luminous screen of the window. There was no mistaking that it was Holmes. It was a perfect reproduction. He sees this silhouette of Holmes across the street. He even has to grab Holmes and say, wait, are you here? Maybe this has all been a dream with a ghost.
Exactly. What is this? Wait, it's a Christmas Story.
It wouldn't, but but it also wouldn't have surprised Doyle. Doyle was like always looking for evidence that there is an
It's the
afterlife.
supernatural,
You know,
exactly.
so maybe I'm being visited by the ghost of Holmes. He wouldn't think that was ridiculous.
Yeah.
But no, Holmes is there, and he lets him know that. Well, at first he throws out a Shakespeare quote: "I trust that age doth not wither, nor custom stale my infinite variety."
Yep.
Little paraphrase of Antony and Cleopatra. Quote: "Age cannot wither her, nor custom stake her infinite variety." Stale her infinite variety. Sorry. I love that he does that. And then he says, Watson says, the joy and pride which the artist takes in his own creation. Holmes is not just the scientific logician.
Mhm.
He is artistic and creative. He has art in his blood, right?
Yes, art in his blood.
From another early story when he talks about his grandmother,
Yeah, and
the French
artist Vernet.
Vernet. So
Vernet.
they are Holmes has had this bust made for him, this wax bust, to be in the window. Watson's like, "You thought the rooms were watched?" And Holmes says, "I knew they were watched. That's why we're doing all this. They've been watching them continuously since I arrived." So, because Moran himself has always known that Holmes is alive because he saw him, Moriarty, go over and he threw rocks at him. And the others in the organization know that too. So they're just waiting for Holmes to come back.
Exactly.
There was Holmes saw one of them too, Parker by name, a garroter
by trade.
A garroter, if those don't know, is murdering people by strangulation. So
think piano wire.
Yeah. So isn't it also that when you have the rope or whatever thing,
Yeah,
then you crank like a piece of wood?
yeah, you can do that, but yeah, but piano wire is so much more cinematic. So
yes. But Holmes doesn't care about the garroter. He cares about the more formidable person, the bosom friend of Moriarty. That's who he really cares about. The man who dropped rocks over the cliff, the most cunning and dangerous criminal in London. Well, now they sit and they wait. Now it's the stakeout, where they sit in the room and wait, and
wait.
Watson's like, the shadow moved, and he's got Holmes like, of course, Mrs. Hudson's been moving it like every 15 minutes. She's moved it. They and then they finally hear somebody come in the back door. Holmes crouches against the wall. You see an outline of a man who comes in, crouching, menacing into the room. And this is, obviously Moran. We've read the story. His two eyes shone like stars, and his features were working convulsively. He was an elderly man with a thin, projecting nose, a high, bald forehead, and a huge, grizzled mustache. He had an opera hat, an evening dress, shirt front on, but he was also gaunt and swarthy, scored with deep, savage lines. So it's, he's tanned from all his experience out, in India mostly.
Yep.
But he is a gentleman. He's got the opera hat, the formal clothes on, and he's got a stick, which he then, but then Watson hears it's metal, and it turns out this stick, as he puts it together, is an air gun. And then Watson hears a long, whirling, grinding noise, ending once more in a powerful click, a gun with a curiously misshapen butt, and then he hears the strange, loud whiz and long, silvery tinkle of broken glass. That fired the air gun. Doesn't make a loud report with gunpowder as usual guns do, because it's an air gun. So it's quiet. And this isn't a fantasy thing, people. Air guns existed then.
No, it does.
Now.
Yeah.
but people had them then as well. And then as soon as that happens, Holmes sprang like a tiger onto the marksman's back and hurled him flat upon his face. He was up again at a moment, and with convulsive strength, he seized Holmes by the throat. But I struck him on the head with the butt of my revolver, and he dropped again upon the floor. Moran would have won, maybe. Like,
Yeah.
he's got Holmes. He's choking him out.
Yeah. I mean, the epic battle.
Yeah, Holmes isn't going to tap out, though. We know that about him. Holmes would just go unconscious. But
But this is
luckily,
blunt force trauma with the back of the gun. I mean, or this is delightful. I mean, it's better than just shooting a man. So we'll take it.
luckily, it is still Watson is there to save Holmes.
Exactly. That's
And
why
does
he
it.
brings him.
They, I mean, all those stories where like put your gun in your pocket and make sure you're ready, and he saves him. Does he save him in another
Mm,
that we've had so far?
I
I mean, they pull him off in the Reigate Squires. They attack
Yeah.
him. There's other people there too. Well, he shoots Tonga
Yeah.
in
Sign of four.
Time
Yeah.
4. Um but I don't know if he's,
Hmm.
specifically in a fight saves Sherlock in an adventure yet, but he
Yeah.
has certainly here, regardless of whether he did or not.
Yeah.
Now the police come in, that you, Lestrade? And we have this nice little
Uh,
exchange, right? It's good to see you back in London, sir. And Holmes says, I think you went a little unofficial help. And, oh, you handled the Molesley mystery, with your, well, let's say you handled it. I love the little Holmes Lestrade, which hasn't changed. Holmes is still like, yeah, you're still an idiot cop, but hey, nice to see you.
but you're the best idiot cop that we
There you
have.
go.
So
That's
yeah.
it. So you're the best of a bad bunch. Um, Back to Moran with his tremendously virile yet sinister face. He has the brow of a philosopher above and the jaw of a sensualist. He must have started with great capacities for good or for evil, but when you read nature's plainest danger signals on him, you realize that
Mhm.
um, again, it's this nature warns us through a person's features. This is more of that Cesare Lombroso,
Yep, the Lombroso. Yeah,
criminals, the criminality, morality. It's a biological trait in
Yep.
people. Very dangerous thinking.
Yep.
But it's also thinking that has come out of popular Darwinism.
Well, it's popular Darwinism, and also, I mean, it's an attempt at being scientific about looking or trying to consider like a scientific perspective or what was thought to be a scientific perspective
Yeah.
on criminal behavior. Yeah.
That's how he reads him, and then Moran is, you fiend. He kept on muttering, you clever, clever fiend. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
In the manuscript and in Collier's,
Mm-hmm.
it says devil.
Ooh.
Doyle wrote devil. Collier's is like, that's fine. Devil's fine. But the Strand, house style, you can't be calling somebody a devil. That's still kind of a, risque thing. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
because what if I have a copy of the Strand and my wife, or worse, my daughter, picks it up and reads, you devil. Like, oh no, you've been corrupted. So they had to change devil to fiend. So
Censorship.
that's it. So it's Holmes throws another little Shakespeare another Shakespeare quote, journeys end in lovers
Lovers
meeting,
meeting. Oh, I love that line.
as the old play says, which is from Twelfth Night.
Yep.
Um,
Which is very significant in referencing Holmes's birthday.
yes, which is, tell people.
Oh, January 6th. So 12th night, of course, is the 12th day after Christmas. Twelfth Night is the only Shakespearean play to be referenced not once but twice in the canon. And so BSI founder Christopher Morley's brother, I believe Felix, it's either Felix or Frank, but I think it was Felix.
Felix.
Yeah, Felix.
Oh, no. Is it?
Oh,
no, it might have been Frank.
I have a ginger.
There you go.
Hi. Oh, well, we're finishing up. Hi, babe.
Oh, okay. You guys
We're still live.
Yes, we're still live. So yes,
Sorry,
stay.
I will let you mute.
It's okay, babe. It's my superior ginger has arrived. But no, it's basically Felix basically theorized that January 6th, because the double 12th night reference was Holmes's birthday, and also it just happened to also be Felix's birthday.
Yes.
So you know,
So-
it was perfect.
Becomes
Yeah.
Sherlock Holmes's birthday. I look at this as he's quoted two different plays of Shakespeare in this story. You know what Holmes did the last 3 years? He's been reading Shakespeare for 3 years. And maybe
I'm meditating.
maybe he was an actor then on the stage. He always, I mean, he is a great actor.
Well, he was a
Earl lost
let's see, what is an actor and a rare one?
Maybe
I
this
think
is what he spent some of his time doing. This is me playing the game
perhaps
during the
I mean, you know,
hiatus.
perhaps. I mean, you know, but this is one of the reasons why the Sherlockians celebrate Holmes's birthday in January. Both the Sherlock Holmes Society of London and the Baker Street Irregulars happen to have their annual dinner meetings in January, as close to, I mean, each society flip-flops 1 year, or each year one society gets the early week and then the other one gets the later week, and then they flip-flop. But everybody basically is celebrating Holmes's birthday at some point in January.
Well, here, but we'll have another. But here's another reference, because then he introduces everybody. This is Colonel Sebastian Moran, one of Her Majesty's Indian Army, and the best heavy game shot that our Eastern Empire has ever produced. Your bag of tigers still remains unrivaled.
Oh
But
yes,
this is the change that he's made in the manuscript here, because originally Sebastian was not his name. And here's the manuscript.
Oh yes.
And it is down the bottom here. I have introduced you Colonel, and he was originally Aloysius Moran.
Yeah. Ugh.
It's just that's not, I mean, I don't know if Sebastian helps, but Aloysius doesn't work. But I'm also thinking too, Sebastian is a character in Twelfth Night as well. It's Viola's brother. It's separated from her at the ship. So Holmes is reading Shakespeare, and then comes up with a name in that as well. So there you go. Well, Doyle did, at least.
Yeah.
And that's through the rest of the manuscript now. All through the manuscript, he wrote Aloysius, and then he went and corrected it every time.
And I'm so glad for that, just because Aloysius is, I mean, it's a fun name to say, but it's not exactly a name that would strike fear in the hearts of anyone.
Holmes, I'm not sure Sebastian does either, but you know.
Well, at least it's a little more edgy.
They Holmes then teases Moran like, oh, you know, now like I'm in the empty house is my tree, and you're and there's my bait, and I caught you, and you know.
And I have to admit, with the Granada series, this scene is handled so differently. Okay, so I've been binging on repeat the Stephen Fry audio book adaptation of this in preparation for tonight, you know, it's very straightforward delivered, you know, these lines. But in the Granada series, there's an edge with Brett. Like you know, he is like hot and heavy and angry and like, you know, pumped, because you know, like the adrenaline is pumping through him, because he realized, you know, like this man just made an attempt on his life. And so when he's like, you know, you're my tiger, you know, basically kind of the, you know, it's the most excited that we see Jeremy's Holmes. And I like that. I like how that's presented, just because it does show, I think, the fiery passion that Holmes is capable of.
Which I think happens a lot in stories, and it's a good reflection that Brett brings out of these stories, that this is, you know, Holmes is very passionate.
Yeah.
Especially during these moments of reveal. He's
Exactly.
very into them. But the fact that he would also perhaps have some genuine anger after
Mhm.
3 years, I had to
Well,
pretend
yeah,
I was dead, and finally am able to defeat, the only other person I'm going to need to defeat, and then I can get on with my life.
yeah. I mean, plus, I mean, when we'll just say, and it's revealed a little later on, but it's like, he hits the bust, basically straight on. If that was Holmes, his brains would have been splattered all across, the back wall of Baker Street.
Yep.
I mean, basically there was a very legitimate attempt on Holmes's life at that point, and it's like, you didn't get me. You
Mhm.
didn't get me. It's a very in your face moment,
Yeah.
but in much, we'll just say much more dignified Victorian language.
And he called, and his metaphor is Moran as the animal, and then he behaves like one. He's
Yep.
springing forward with a snarl of rage.
Mhm.
He's just the fury. He's like a caged animal here
Well,
now.
again, more of the Cheshire A. Lombroso callback to, kind of the degenerate.
And then Holmes, all the dotting the I's and crossing the T's, says, I didn't think you'd actually choose this house. I thought you were going to fire from somewhere else. Like every little detail he needs to account for at the end. And we get the
Mhm.
revelation that, like, well, actually, Holmes messed up a little. He
And
didn't think he was going to come into the house. Good
yeah,
thing
he
it messed
miscalculated
up.
just a little.
Good thing he didn't sneak up on him and kill him as they
Yeah.
were waiting for him outside. Um, well, the gun is there. Holmes says, I knew von Herder, the blind German mechanic who
Yes.
constructed it to the order of the late Professor Moriarty. Little, backstory for the gun, for the air gun itself.
Mhm.
And then tells Lestrade, okay, he's all yours. And Lestrade's like, oh, well, what's the charge? And he's like, well,
Yeah,
Lestrade
Lestrade's
says,
like, well, the attempted murder of Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Of
no,
course.
no, it's not Lestrade. This is the guy who killed Ronald Adair with an expanding bullet from the air gun. So this is, um, he's cracked the case for
Well,
Lestrade.
yes, and I love that Holmes gives full credit to Lestrade here.
You take all the credit. I don't need the
Big
credit
credit.
in this one. He always says that and knows it.
Yeah,
And
my name figures in no newspapers.
yeah.
I mean, but still, it's a nice welcome home gift. I have returned home. Here's my gift to you, Lestrade. It's just I think it's just so beautifully handled.
And now, Watson, let's go back and smoke cigars in my study, which is interesting. He calls it my study because Watson's not living there yet.
Oh
He's still
no,
in
I
his own
mean,
house, but
yeah,
it's
it's
still
it's
my
it's it's
study. But
not Watson's study anymore.
Watson is welcome back to it. Um, and they head back to Baker Street. And this is where in the manuscript that we have an interesting
Mm,
change here, that
mm.
in the manuscript, it is all right. Oh, it's down the bottom here. All right, Mrs. Turner, I am
Oh
much
yes,
obliged
Mrs.
for your
Turner.
assistance. And he crosses it out and write Hudson. Now, it's not like Doyle forgot because already 5 times in this manuscript he has said Mrs. Hudson and he didn't mistake her name. But what makes it interesting is that in Scandal in Bohemia, uncorrected, the housekeeper,
Is
the,
Mrs.
the
Turner.
landlady, or whatever you want to call her, is called Mrs. Turner.
Yeah.
That she's established in Study in Scarlet and Sign of Four as Mrs. Hudson. Doyle forgot that when he was writing Scandal in Bohemia, he wrote Mrs. Turner. Nobody caught it at the time. And now, it's odd that that's the name that comes up. So I think he had a servant in the family named Mrs. Turner. Did I read this
Mhm.
somewhere when he was
I think
younger or
so.
something like that? So the name is in his head, but he
Yeah.
he he catches it. Not that the editors at the time wouldn't have caught it, I think. Anyway,
Hmm.
Doyle himself caught it and changes it to Mrs.
Mrs.
Hudson.
Hudson.
And Watson sees the room. It's all Baker Street is where it was. The chemical corner, the scrap cases, the violin case, the pipe rack, the Persian slipper, which contained the tobacco. It's all preserved. Like you can go visit the museum in London now.
Exactly. Now there was actually a question on the Q&A about how Mycroft, and I answered this already, but how Mycroft would have known like how to preserve it. And it's mostly Mycroft would have just paid Mrs. Hudson just to leave it as
Yeah,
is.
Mycroft didn't have to do anything. He just
Yeah,
like
he
made
basically
sure
was
it's
just the
done.
money man, you know.
Hudson, keep the rooms clean. I mean, they had to fix it up after the fire, but you
Well,
know,
yeah.
but
But yeah, once it was fixed up after the fire, it's like just put things back where they were.
yeah, it's not hard to do.
Yeah.
They Mrs. Hudson, it turns out, he says, I hope you preserved all precautions, Mrs. Hudson. This isn't turning the bus. She says, I went it on my knees, sir. Just she's on her hands and knees with a guy waiting to shoot in
Yes.
the room, going and turning. And then she even goes, and she's like,
And
oh yeah, here's the bullet. I picked it up. Here it is.
oh
Mrs.
yes.
Hudson is fearless.
Mrs. Hudson is genuinely amazing. And
Gets
this
no
is,
call out from Sherlock or Watson either. Like, come
well,
on,
and actually
guys.
this is where I like how Granada handles the end of this, because it actually gives just a little bit more justice to Mrs. Hudson. But we'll get there in the last line.
She
Yeah,
even picked up
up
the
the
bullet.
bullets.
So,
I mean,
well,
amazing, awesome lady.
Holmes puts on his mouse-colored dressing gown.
The
There we get the
third
mouse
color.
on. It was
Yes.
blue and twisted lip, but that might not have been his own dressing gown. It was purple. It was somewhere else. Purple in blue carbuncle, and now
Yep.
mouse. And they are now the
And
three
that's
colors.
the three colors, which explains, and of course I didn't wear it today, but the BSI tie,
Yeah.
or colors is basically blue, purple, and or purple, blue, and mouse.
Good. All righty. And then it's Holmes is going to talk about solving this and who Moran is, blowing great clouds of smoke from his cigar. They take out the collection of M's in the scrapbook, Morgan the poisoner, Merridew of abominable memory, Matthews, who knocked out my left canine in the waiting room at Charing Cross. I mean, these brilliant little details that just kind of grow the backstory so much about these characters in just phrases.
Oh, it's so perfect.
It's just so well done on Doyle's part to kind of create this effect of,
It's
so
a
much
deep
more.
creative universe. Yeah.
Moran's listing is like the hero of an explorer of the empire, right? Once British minister to Persia. Oh, his father was once British minister to Persia. Eton and Oxford. So was John Clay in Red-Headed League.
Well, yes, extraordinarily well bred.
Yeah. Like all these different, foreign campaigns he fought in, all the clubs he belongs to. And then in Holmes's precise hand, the second most dangerous man in London. I love that. So, I mean, we know the first was Moriarty, so this was now the second. So,
and of course, Watson is now surprised because he's like, second most dangerous man in London, yes, but like this is the career of an honorable soldier. I mean, Watson also being late of the Her Majesty's Army, I mean, is kind of like, wait, a soldier did this? Like,
he's surprised,
yeah, he's very surprised.
With that listing there, this is a good guy, and Holmes is like, like some trees which grow to a certain height, then suddenly develop some unsightly eccentricity. You will see it often in humans. And then Holmes says, and this is more of this kind of
Lombroso-y
eugenics is what it is. I have a theory that the individual represents in his development the whole procession of his ancestors, and that a sudden turn to good or evil stands for some strong influence which came into the line of his pedigree. It's because of his genes. Now, it's more than just eugenics, because it's all what it also says is that it's that fear of these kind of atavistic, primitive traits coming out in humans, because this is the way people popularly misinterpret Darwinism, is that if we evolve, we can devolve, and that's not really how it works. But
Well,
metaphorically, you can talk about it that
well,
way,
it's the
but this
concept
isn't
of a
metaphoric.
throwback.
Yeah.
Yeah, a throwback or degenerate. And I think there's a paper in that as well. So
And then Watson's like, surely rather fanciful. And then Holmes says, well, I don't insist upon it, which I really like.
mm,
And Holmes is like, yeah, okay, I'm not going to insist on this theory, which is good. But then he says, whatever the cause, Colonel Moran began to go wrong.
yes.
And then he hooks up with Moriarty, and Moriarty, then he becomes a member of the gang, and Moriarty supporting him with money. He talks about why it's a throwback to the Final Problem. Remember when I said I was afraid of air guns when I showed up at your house in Final Problem? This is why I was afraid of air guns. Good old Doyle to remember that, to bring that
Exactly. I mean,
detail back.
again, bringing that detail back. I mean, it's masterful, storytelling.
Yeah. Then he says, but he couldn't stop Moran without evidence. He needed to come back and provide, like, Moran's already escaped the police. And Holmes needs some kind of incriminating evidence to stop him. So when he hears that it is that about Adair shooting, he knows, bingo, now I can go back and get Moran because he just committed a murder and I will stop him. So that's why Holmes finally now chooses to come back.
The timing is right, and he can take down, the one person who basically is still a threat to him.
And then Watson's wondering, well, why did he kill Adair? And Holmes thinks that Adair must have found out that Moran was cheating. So he had to kill him because, if he exposed, and that's why he was counting the money, because he had to figure out how much money do I have to pay back to the people who he cheated.
Yeah, because
Then if he,
Adair was actually an honorable man and
Yeah.
would have paid back the money that was ill-gotten.
but if he exposes
Moran.
Moran's kicked out of society, can't play, cards anywhere anymore, and won't get
Exactly, and that's how he makes his money, is basically by cheating at cards. I mean, it's like if somebody was a Las Vegas like card counter, and was making a fortune doing that, and then somebody was going to expose them, and that was their only source of income.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense to for Moran to want to exact revenge.
Let's finish up by looking at the final page of the manuscript.
The
And here
final
it is.
page. And this is this last passage actually in the Granada series is the line is actually given to Mrs. Hudson, who shows up with champagne for both Watson and Holmes and and they all have a champagne toast. Basically, it'll be verified or disproved at the trial. Meanwhile, come what may, Colonel Moran will trouble us no more, and the famous airgun of von Herder will embellish Scotland Yard Museum. And this is where Mrs. Hudson in the Granada version picks up. And once again, Mr. Sherlock Holmes is free to devote his life to examining those interesting little problems which the complex life of London so plentifully presents. Oh man, that is an ending.
That's great they gave her the lines of that, but Sherlock is back.
Yeah.
I am once again
exactly. It's like
a detective in London. The once and future detective has returned, and Doyle can then start writing more stories.
Huzzah!
Finally brought back. Well,
and there's more stories in this back half than there was in the front half. And that's what I love about this. Now that said, though, it's just like, and like this particular collection, The Return, I mean, actually does have some of the finest stories, in the collection. And so, I'm really sad that we won't have the opportunity to engage like with the Norwood Builder or the Dancing Men, or one of my personal favorites, The Second Stain, which the Granada series does like almost perfectly in an adaptation. So we'll just say my little heart is sad.
But you'll return for our final wrap-up show next week, episode 30. Mary will be here too. Anastasia. Curtis can't make it, but he'll be with the Hound subscription. So we will get to do one more, and you'll be with the Hound show as
Oh,
well.
yes.
So
I'm very excited for that.
and also Scott Monty and Mark Jones and Paul Chapman and Steve Doyle and Max McGee.
Yay, Max.
It's going to be a super fun Hound of the Baskervilles subscription only. But don't forget, everyone, on episode 30, our wrap up, I will have another announcement about a program this fall that you don't want to miss.
Nope.
Sherlockians, thank you for joining us for episode 29 of 30 of Sherlock Mondays. Thanks to Steve Rothman for sharing his Sherlockian expertise and talking about the Empty House manuscript and the edition that he edited with it. Hound of the Baskervilles starts in 3 weeks. Register also for our fall 24 Biblioventures, Monsters and Ghosts, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Christmas Carol. It's going to be a great fall doing this show. Thanks to our chat, Mrs. Hudson Brianna, for managing the live chat links. Thank you to the sponsor of Sherlock Mondays, Lisa Washington. We couldn't do these shows without the generous support of our patrons. You can support the Rosenbach through donation. Your support helps us create more programs like this and also care for our collections. And you could also become a member. Membership gives you early access and discounts to programs and courses. You can find out more at our website, rosenbach.org. Subscribe to this channel, like these videos. If you're listening to the podcast, leave us a review. Whoo! We got through it, Monica. Well done.
I mean, it's 2 hours, 15 minutes. It's a long one, but
that was last week,
well
too.
worth it.
I think it's the same time as
worth
last
it.
week. So,
Okay.
cheers.
Cheers.
Bye-bye, everyone. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library, where the game is a book. Thanks, everyone. Good night.